They said the city was gone. They said everyone in it was either dead or something worse. For 3 months, I've been a ghost, hiding in the shadows of this dead world. I spent every night huddled in the corner of this abandoned gas station, counting the cans of food I had left, trying to force myself to forget the life I once had. But I couldn't forget him. My brother, Leo. We were supposed to leave together the night the city fell. But in the chaos at the subway station, the screaming, the crushing weight of the crowd, we were pushed apart. I remember the last thing I saw, Leo being dragged toward the hospital district while the military barricades went up, sealing us off from each other forever. Since then, the guilt has been a physical weight in my chest. I convinced myself he didn't make it. It was easier that way. But yesterday, everything changed. My radio hasn't picked up a clear signal in months. It's always been just dead air or the sound of the infected shuffling through the streets. But this wasn't static. It was his voice. Weak, terrified, and coming from the one place no one in their right mind would ever go. The Central Hospital. I'm standing at the edge of the city limits now. My pack is light. My shotgun is loaded. And for the first time in 90 days, I have a reason to run toward the fire instead of away from it. If Leo was alive in that basement, I'm getting him out. Even if I have to go through hell to reach him.
They told us the end would be quick, that the military would handle it, that the quarantine zones would hold, and that by morning we'd wake up to a world that made sense again. They were wrong. The end wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing decay.
For 3 months, I've been living in the hollowed-out shell of this gas station, surrounded by the ghosts of a civilization that died while I was still trying to find a way to breathe. I've learned to walk without making a sound, to sleep with one eye open, and to bury the memory of who I was before. But some memories are like infections. They just refuse to die. I've survived on rainwater and canned peaches that taste like copper and regret. I've learned to walk without making a sound, to sleep with one eye open, and to bury the memory of who I was before. But some memories are like infections. They just refuse to die. I see him every time I close my eyes. My brother, Leo. That final night at the subway station. The sheer primal terror of it still haunts my dreams. The station was a slaughterhouse. Thousands of people, all pushing, screaming, trampling over one another to get onto the last train out. I had his hand in mine. I can still feel the frantic grip of his fingers against my palm. But then, the blast doors slammed down. The crowd surged like a tidal wave, and he was ripped from my side. I saw them, those things, the infected. They descended on the crowd, and I watched Leo get pushed back toward the hospital district. I didn't turn back. I kept moving. I chose my life, and in doing so, I surrendered his. I've spent 90 days telling myself he's gone. It was a cold comfort, but it was the only thing keeping me from walking into the streets and letting them take me too.
Last night, the silence finally broke.
My blood turned to ice. It wasn't a broadcast. It wasn't a glitch. It was him. Weak, broken, and shivering. Somewhere deep beneath the ruins of the Central Hospital. I'm sitting here now, staring at the map. The city is a maze of death, and that hospital is the heart of the infection. Everyone with a brain would head for the countryside, towards safety. But I'm not heading for safety.
I'm packing my bag, checking my ammo, and I'm going back. If he's still down there, if he's still holding on, I owe him this one chance. I'm gonna find him, or I'm gonna die trying. Stepping out of that gas station felt like walking into the mouth of a beast. The air in the city doesn't move anymore. It just hangs there, heavy with the stench of stagnant water and something far more sinister. I stood in the middle of the interstate, the asphalt cracked and choked with abandoned vehicles. Every car was a tomb, some with doors flung wide, others locked tight, concealing the horrors inside. It's strange how quickly a civilization turns into a junkyard. I moved along the perimeter of the downtown district, keeping to the alleyways. He learned quickly that the main roads are death traps. That's where the hordes roam, guided by the sound of the wind or the settling of a building. I kept my head down, my ears straining for any rhythm that didn't belong to the rain. I froze, 20 feet away, huddled against a brick wall, was one of them. It didn't look like the monsters you see in movies. It was just broken. A man, once, wearing a suit that hung off his skeletal frame, his jaw hanging at an unnatural angle. He was clicking, a rhythmic, disturbing sound, as if he were trying to remember how to speak. I held my breath until my lungs burned. If I moved, he'd turn. If I turned, he'd scream. And if he screamed, the whole block would descend on me in seconds. I waited for what felt like hours, listening to the city's dark symphony, the creaking of rusted signs, the distant collapse of a wall, and the relentless, suffocating silence. When he finally shuffled away, I exhaled, my hands shaking so violently I had to grip my shotgun tighter just to keep it from rattling. The Central Hospital loomed in the distance, its massive silhouette cut through the fog like a jagged tooth against the skyline. It's huge, a sprawling, multi-winged complex that was supposed to save lives. Now, it was just the biggest cage in the city. The lights inside were dead, but I could see shadows flickering in the upper floors. Something was down there, in the foundation, waiting. And for the first time in this nightmare, I realized that surviving the zombies was the easy part. The hard part was going to be surviving the secrets that died with this place. I finally made it to the perimeter fence. The hospital gate, once meant to welcome the sick and the dying, was now a jagged mess of twisted iron and shattered glass. A hand-painted sign dangled from a chain, barely legible in the moonlight. Quarantine zone. Do not enter. It felt like a sick joke. I wasn't just entering. I was digging my own grave. The hinges screamed in protest, a sound that sliced through the night like a blade. I froze, my heartbeat thumping in my ears, waiting for the swarm. But the silence held. I slipped through the gap, my boots crunching on layers of discarded masks and patient charts. The lobby
was a cavern of shadows. Desks were overturned, and the air here was different. Stale, thick with the smell of floor wax and blood. This wasn't just a building anymore. It felt like a living, breathing machine that had been forced to stop. I checked my flashlight. The battery was dying, casting a weak, flickering yellow beam that barely cut through the darkness. I had to reach the basement levels. That's where the radio signal originated. That's where Leo was. As I moved past the reception desk, I saw them. Not the roaming infected, but people, or what was left of them. Dozens of stretchers were lined up in the hallways, covered in white sheets that hadn't moved in months. But as I passed, I swore I saw a foot twitch under one of the shrouds. I didn't stop to look. I didn't stop to pray. I just kept moving, my grip tightening on my shotgun until my knuckles turned white. The elevators were dead, so I headed for the service stairs. Every step down into the dark felt like a descent into the underworld. The temperature dropped, the air grew tighter, and the walls began to vibrate with a low, rhythmic hum. It wasn't the sound of the infected. It was mechanical, industrial. My father always warned me that there were places in this world that governments don't talk about. Standing at the top of the stairwell, I realized with a sickening clarity that the hospital wasn't just a place of healing. It was a cover. And whatever they were hiding down there, they were still working on it. The stairs ended, and I stepped out into a hallway that looked nothing like a hospital. The walls were reinforced with thick steel plates, and the floor was grated metal, vibrating under my weight. The air here didn't smell like rot anymore. It smelled like ozone, burnt wire, and something sharp, like chemical cleaning agents. I pressed myself against the wall as a door ahead slid open. 2 figures walked out. They wore lab coats, but they were carrying assault rifles. They weren't soldiers. They looked like scientists, their faces hidden behind gas masks, moving with a terrifying, calculated precision. I waited until they were gone, then slipped into the room they had just vacated. My flashlight beam swept across the room and died. I gasped. It wasn't a storage room. It was a laboratory. And in the center of the room, behind a massive glass partition, sat a chair. I recognized the jacket hanging off the back. It was Leo's. I rushed to the glass, slamming my hands against it. "Leo! Leo, can you hear me?" He was slumped in the chair, hooked up to a series of glowing blue tubes. He looked thin, broken, but he was alive. Suddenly, a monitor next to him flared to life, showing a complex neural map of his brain. But the readings weren't human. They were fluctuating in patterns I couldn't understand, synchronized with the hum of the entire building. Subject 742 shows 90% integration. The host is adapting. My heart stopped. They weren't just experimenting on him. They were using him, using his neural pathways to bridge whatever signal was controlling the infected outside. Leo wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was the key to the entire catastrophe. I looked at the release valve on the side of the tank, then back at the heavily armed guards patrolling the corridor. I had come to save my brother, but I realized in that second that if I pulled him out, The signal holding the horde back might collapse entirely. I wasn't just holding a life in my hands. I was holding the survival of the entire city.
I didn't think twice. I didn't care about the big picture or the fate of the city. I only saw Leo. I grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and slammed it into the glass. The glass gave way. The blue liquid rushed out, pouring across the metal floor like freezing needles. I caught Leo as he slumped forward, his body limp, his breathing shallow. He was ice cold. "Leo, listen to me," I shouted, shaking him. "We're getting out of here, right now."
Suddenly, the intercom screamed again. Not with a synthetic voice, but a human one, sharp and furious. "Lock down the lower levels! Terminate the intruder!" The metal doors at the far end of the corridor exploded inward. Not by the guards, but by them, the infected. They had breached the upper levels, and they were pouring into the basement like a tide of rotting flesh. The scientists and the guards didn't stand a chance. They were swarmed in seconds, their screams drowned out by the wet, hungry roar of the horde. I hauled Leo onto my shoulder. Every step was a fight. We scrambled through the service tunnels, the sounds of destruction echoing behind us. I could hear the basement, the source of the signal, the source of the control, being torn apart by the very things it created. We burst out into the night air just as the main hospital building began to collapse inward, a massive cloud of dust and debris swallowing the street. I didn't look back. I didn't care if the signal was broken or if the secret died with the building. I just kept running. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in a bruised purple, I found an abandoned truck on the outskirts. I laid Leo in the passenger seat and started the engine. He let out a long, ragged breath. A real one. He was still here. The city is still burning behind us. There's no map for where we're going, and I have no idea if Leo will ever be the same again. But for the first time in 90 days, the radio is silent. And in this world, silence is the only victory that matters. They say that when you survive something like that, you're supposed to feel lucky. You're supposed to wake up, breathe in the fresh air, and thank God that you made it out. But luck has nothing to do with it. We're just lingering. Leo is sitting by the window again. He hasn't spoken a word since we left the city. He just stares out at the woods, his hands resting on his lap. Sometimes, when he thinks I'm not watching, I see his fingers twitch in that same rhythmic pattern, the same hum I heard down in the laboratory basement. I don't know what they did to him. I don't know if the signal is truly gone or if it's just sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up inside his head. I walked over to the radio, ready to smash it, but I stopped. The static wasn't random. It was a sequence, a coordinate. Maybe the city was just the beginning. Maybe the experiment wasn't meant to stay in that basement. I looked at Leo, and for a split second, he looked back. His eyes weren't just tired. They were distant, like he was listening to something that I couldn't hear. I picked up my rifle and checked the magazine. The city is behind us, but the nightmare, I think it followed us home.